but you heard me, so I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Or if you have any question, like I would love to hear more from you.
How is so you said it's gonna last for about a year and a half, the whole process of first of all electing the assembly, right?
Mhm.
And then you it will be collectively written, the constitution.
No, no. So we are choosing now. So the weird thing they did, which many people didn't like, is that we're going to use the same system for choosing parliament, for choosing the assembly, the representative chamber, not the Senate. So it's 155 people that are going to be elected now in April, and they are going to write it. They're going to write it, and they have, I think, between 9 and 12 months to write it. And after that period, it's going to be voted in a national referendum. Yeah.
What we're interested mainly for this experiment that we're doing, this collective documentary, is how people take collective decisions. And we were thinking maybe
Mm,
you can tell us about how that happened in the uprising and how it
yeah.
worked.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's been a bit like learning by doing. My feeling was that, so very early in October, like I would say, so the first couple of weeks were very much focused on being on the streets. The first week was a direct protest to the military, the use of the military for repression and the installation of a curfew. And there was this whole idea of we want to change everything. Like, this is not about the increase of the fare. This is about inequality. And you would have like massive canvases in squares where people would write what they wanted to change and what was needed to be done. Like, free healthcare, better pensions, higher taxes for the rich. And so you would have like this collective conversation talking about what was needed to be done. And it was on everything like, recovery, property over water, which here is private, blah blah blah. And after, I would say, 2 or 3 weeks, so very quickly, this idea of writing a new constitution as a process for refounding the state started to be talked on the streets. And we started organizing like assemblies called cabildos, which is like a Spanish a Spanish thing we inherited. So different organizations, feminist groups, ecological groups, unions, the unions of teachers, and collectives from different neighborhoods started to call the people from their organizations to come together and discuss what they wanted to change in the new constitution. So, people started selling the constitution, the old one, the one written during the dictatorship, on the streets. So, people could buy the constitution and you could take it to your assembly and say, oh, look, here in this article, um, it says that private property is very well protected, and you have all these different resources that protect private property, and it says nothing about anything important. And for instance, I was part of a party back then. Now I'm not, but in that moment we also organized a couple of these meetings in which we had lawyers explaining to us how the constitution worked. And there was a moment in which people really needed to understand how was our political architecture before starting making decisions. People really was like, okay, like, our house is on fire, like, I need to understand why we have this mess. So we had like many interviews and many like online courses and many of these meetings in which people would go and explain why our constitution was so bad, because it had been explicitly designed to keep the political order of the dictatorship further into the future. And that's why even 30 years after, we are still living under that same neoliberal design. So that was like the first month, I would say. And after we knew a new constitution would actually happen, then, the more political, like, yeah, like an organization of that interest started. And you had like two sides. Like, on the one hand, like the more institutionalized space, like political parties started their own debates among their own people. And also, what was really, really interesting and still continuous, is a bit going down, was the creation of local networks of assemblies. So, for instance, here I'm in an archipelago that has 10 different councils. So in each of these councils, a local assembly started, and people started meeting and started discussing and making like diagnosis of what they needed, and then they came together in a larger assembly that brings together these 10 assemblies, and they brought together all the material they had, and they divided the work of, you know, seeing, oh, these two things are written similarly, they address the same issue, it's one petition. And that has been happening throughout the year. Like in the middle of the pandemic, this assembly kept meeting, and now they have actually managed to write something. I'm talking specifically about where I am right now, not in the capital. I think in Santiago things have been a bit different. They managed to write like their own constitution. Like they wrote, oh, if we could write the constitution, what would we write? So they wrote the whole thing again, and it was by consensus. Like different people from different assemblies were all present in the writing. It was like an open crowdsource writing, but it's also like a working document, so it was presented like more of a conversation, so it's not closed. The idea is that we can generate more conversations with this and gather more input. And I mean, the text is just beautiful. It's amazing. Like it talks about the right to care, and it talks about how we need to implement more caring relationships with the environment, and it's really nice. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Like I don't know if the representative of our district is even going to read that, but just at the level of mobilizing people on the ground has been like a really, really beautiful opportunity.
How did
Yeah,
it?
I have a question. So this constitution that was written, or example of constitution, it's how abstract is this and how concrete is this constitution? Specifically, what relationship it's proposed between the local assembly and the central government?
Yes. Well, it's very specific. I mean, it's kind of it's a bit of a mix between a real constitution. You know, it has like the chapters that our current constitution and all constitutions have, but it also has like preambles in which they explain like, oh, our current neoliberal constitution did this, blah blah blah. So we need to change for this. This principle is important. So it has a bit of a background and explanation. And actually, what they proposed as political organization is that, so this was the proposal for how the new political bodies should work. They chose something more of a confederal stuff. So each region, because we're not a federal government, so each region, we have 15 regions. Each region would have its own president, and all presidents would come together, and they would work more like delegates that then would have to go back to their communities and give answer. So it was a very interesting approach to how politics could work. I don't think that will happen. That's extremely hard, but it's a very interesting proposal.
I was also wondering, anyone, please just jump in whenever you have questions. But I was thinking, how did that initial decision came on the street that we have to write a constitution? It's just organic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, as I was telling you, it was I think it's something that was really, really important, at least for me. So I have been part of political movements since I was in uni, at least. So I'm part of the cohort of the generation that grew up in democracy. And so my generation did like a first political movement when we were in school in 2006. It was a very strong um, year of student mobilizations. And then in 2011, with the student movement. And after that, when we came out of uni, basically, there were like a bunch of different movements trying to change things. And one of them was a movement for a constituent assembly. So that had been going on for, say, 10 years. And it was a group of like intellectuals, academics, politicians from political parties that came together and started talking about, we need a new constitution. So for instance, in one of the presidential elections, they asked people to write AC, which is like Asamblea Constituyente. So we could have like a measure of how many people knew about this and wanted to do this, because the government was completely close to this. And then, on the second government of Michelle Bachelet, she actually, taken from 2011 mobilizations, proposed to change the constitution in her program. And there was actually a sort of a exercise of these cabildos, of these meetings to like, she told people, oh, come together, tell us about what you would like for a new constitution. And she made the effort, I think it was a fake effort, but anyway, she made the effort of saying, I want to change the constitution, and started this process, but the process never got anywhere because there was not a sense of urgency. I think there was not like this social effervescence that this was key. This was like the lock that was keeping our democracy trapped. And so like it was really like dormant. So I think when this whole explosion happened in October, that was a very um it was a bit of a collective trance. Like I think for a couple of weeks we were living through the process of seeing each other and acknowledging that something was very, very wrong, and that we were very, very angry, and that all the stories we have told to ourselves about Chile being a successful country and being the miracle of Latin America and all that stuff was just bullshit, and how we just like how the cops didn't care about killing us if we dare to speak back. And so we were really like engaging in that, I would say, for a while, and until like, in a moment in which we could actually like stop and take a breath. These people that had been working on this, I think it came from those spaces, like more organized, maybe more intellectual, said, okay, all of this you are arguing against, since it's so broad, it's from education to health to many things that have to do with basically the neoliberal state. The base of all of this is the constitution. So it really got like it clicked to people, because all this sense of like, we need to refound society, we need to rebuild everything from scratch, like all of this is just wrong, built in the wrong way. So I think it like there was like a connection between a struggle that was like much more from above, if you want, or from organized intellectual elites, and this feeling from the ground. And in a moment it was like, this is actually true, like let's take this flag and use it as our own. But I have to say that some people so I mean, I wouldn't know how to measure this, but I have heard also that for some people that were on the streets, this whole idea of doing a new constitution was like wrong. It was like a way of bringing down the pressure, and that what we needed was actually to overthrow the government of Sebastián Piñera, of the president. And that was number one goal. And after overthrowing him, we could do everything else. But changing the goal of overthrowing the government for having a new constitution was a mistake. That's a feeling that it's kind of big. I wouldn't say, I still think the majority would go for the new constitution, but there was still this resentment of, why did you transform something that was about overthrowing the government into changing the constitution? That was not the goal. So yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a like the struggle over making the interpretation of what was happening, these two wings.
And who was the people who hold another opinion that the government should be overthrown? You said that the constitutional project come from intellectuals and upper class. So who was the other side?
I mean, I remember when I was on the streets, like very specifically, because like you had like an avalanche of information, especially in the last months of 2019. When you were on the streets, many people would say, I mean, the chants were that Piñera should leave. Like the general feeling when you were over there in the fight, in confrontation with the cops, is like, Piñera has to go. He's a murderer, he's a human rights violator. So the more on the streets feeling was that. But then when the organization came, when the cabildos came, that was not really, I mean, that was present as one of the petitions, like he should be out of office and be on trial for his crimes. That was also sometimes present. Me particularly, since I come from a more, maybe a more institutional background, I went to many cabildos that were organized by this broad coordination of ecological institutions that were already organizing for the COP. Remember, the COP was going to happen in Santiago. So we were kind of organized, all the eco-social organizations, and I participate in that a lot. So I was a lot in those spaces that are obviously more institutional. So like in the conversation I participated, it was not really about overthrowing Piñera. It was more about, oh, we need to recover water, we need to protect biodiversity or rights of nature, buen vivir. That was the conversation. It was more conceptual, if you want. But there was a larger, I mean, no, I wouldn't say larger, but there was a large proportion. And I also heard from friends that were in assemblies in very more popular or more working class neighborhoods, in which the main demand was to get Piñera out, and that was it. And they stick with it. And when the new constitution was negotiated by the political parties, they felt very betrayed, very. And that was divide in this moment that we're living through that still lives up to today. Like there is a part of the society that is not small that still feels that signing that agreement in November 2019 was the end of any possibility of this working out, and that was the death sentence of this revolt. And I mean, I have to say, like, just to transparent my position, in the beginning I really supported the signing of that agreement, mainly because I was very scared of the levels of violence we were reaching. But now, seeing the time passing by, I'm starting to think that maybe it was a mistake, because actually it is true that they have really used that to like control what might be possible to do in the constitution. They have really tied the possibilities of change. So it's really sad to see.
Are those people still gathering in this local, the people who are,
Yes.
so they continue?
So I mean, it's a mixed bag, because I think, and then I think the pandemic played us against us so much. Like here where I am, people used to meet, like they have to meet physically because, you know, internet signal is really bad, and meeting online is not the same. But here in this territory, it has continued working, which I think is just amazing. The people here, all the organizers, the local organizers are amazing people. But for instance, I was just hearing from a friend from Santiago that came here to visit, and he said that there was like a local network uh, of local small assemblies that are out of political spaces, that do not have any contact with political parties, that kept working throughout the year, but now it's not working anymore. Now it like died out. Um, and I think like local assemblies in themselves are still meeting and are still gathering, and many of them became also mutual aid groups during the pandemic. But the more coordinated conversations between assemblies is a lot of work, and it's much harder. So that level that could bring a larger coordination between different groups, it's kind of drying out. In some places, I think in Santiago, it's been particularly harsh. I also know in another region here that the regional assembly is really flourishing and doing a lot of stuff, which is great. The one here too. In Santiago, apparently not that well. So it, you know, it's like ups and downs. It really depends.
I didn't understand who signed this agreement in November, who was the people and how they were chosen to sign it.
They were a group of parliamentaries and the presidents of the existing political parties now in parliament, of any political party that had someone in parliament, which is a lot. And I think they all signed it, but the only one who didn't was the Communist Party. They didn't want to sign. They were like, no, we're not playing
But
this
if it
game.
was a popular uprising with actual fights on the streets, what was the moment that you guys switched from popular uprising to the existing political parties signing an agreement?
Well, I think, here is, we always go back to like how the media builds the discourse of what's happening. So there was a month between the first protest, and remember, on the first nine, something like 10 metro stations got completely burned to the ground. So it was a night in which Santiago was on fire. It was like a war scene. I mean, it was absolutely. I remember I had never seen anything similar, and it was what happened in the days after was nothing like the protests that happened in 2006 or 2011 or the protest that the same kids of high school were organizing before. Because remember, before the 18th of October, high school boys and girls were jumping the, how do you call them, like the things of the subway,
Yeah,
and
and
that was like, very organized, and they gathered in places and they all stormed it and opened it for everyone to go for free. So what happened between 18th of October and the 15th of November was much less organized. It was an explosion of things, and many things got burned, many people got killed. It was like very violent, and a lot of people got scared. It was violent because of the government. Obviously, it was state violence in the first place, and people were legitimately protesting. But the way they solved it was, we are in the brink of chaos. We need to stop it. We need to contain this. And I feel that political parties felt completely overwhelmed. They didn't see this coming. No one saw it coming. So political parties, even on the left, uh, and also political parties on the left started being blamed. And this is typical, like a Trump move. Frente Amplio and Revolución Democrática, which was my party, the president and members of government would say this was all organized by us. And, we were coordinated with Venezuela, and it was all about, and these rumors of people coming from abroad to fight with guns and overthrow the government, and basically that we were responsible because we were not condemning violence. So it started off this to be like, oh, you're not doing anything to stop this, you're not telling people to go home. And we were like, what are you talking about? Like, this has nothing to do with us, this is the actual people doing their thing, they're not being led by anyone. And we knew, like, it was, we didn't even try to take that lead and say, oh, now you have to do this. No, like, we didn't even try. So I think there was a moment in which maybe the most conservative elements of political parties just said, we need to sign something that will tell people, will send the message of, this works, um, going to the street works, and we are going to change the constitution. Like, you made it, like, we achieved something. Now we can kind of return to normal and kind of, reopen shops and reopen the subway, because it was all completely shut down. I mean, it wasn't working. The country wasn't really working. No one was going to work. And no country can live like that. That is true. No country can live like that. So there was like this sense of like, okay, we need to do something that will give people the feeling that something was achieved, and that it is possible to transform things, and that they need to trust that this constituent assembly can do something to change their lives. That was the bet, I think.
And what is your personal experience with trying to organize with people, in small groups, in the political, in the party that you were initially part of?
Yeah, well, I mean, I left my party in part because I felt that it wasn't really up to the task that we were facing. Many people just got really, really disappointed. And I think that the heart of this revolt is really in local groups. And I think the most important ones are the ones that are based and are thinking through their own land. Because I am from Santiago, and I have a very privileged background. So I'm used to think through, I come together for policy ideas or policy proposals, but I never organized in where I was. So me living here now and seeing the people organizing from their land, and seeing all the inequalities that come from the territory, it's a new experience for me. So I have been more of an spectator, and I live with people who participate more actively. But since the decisions they are making here are about how our experience of being Chilote from Chiloé, which is where I am, um, has to do with the political order and all the centrality of Santiago, and how we can have a constitution that will give us more, the people who live here, and how we can, recover indigenous land. So it has been a lot of collecting the experience of being from here. So obviously I don't have much to say on that. So I have kept my, I don't feel I have to be there telling people what to do. Obviously, they know exactly what they need, and they have been just talking to each other. And there were many long-standing organizations, and I think they were key. There are a couple of organizations that there is one like peasant organization here that is very strong, that has been working for something like 10 years, and another indigenous like coordination, and they have been really really important to keep this going because they know each other, they know who is like the local leader in each group. So as long as you have those people talking to themselves, they can make open calls, and you make like a flyer that says all the people from Chiloé come to this meeting, and you just send it to everyone and anyone can join. But you need to have that skeleton of previous like social tissue of people working maybe like in other things, not necessarily on the same things, but like, oh, they know of the conflicts with the salmon farming business that is extremely problematic here, or the people that organized to fight against the wind farms like 10 years ago. So like all those networks of, oh, I work in biodiversity, I work with indigenous people, I work with law, I know how to present a Zoom if they do something wrong. Like all these people already knew each other. So now they have used that network to come from our people. And then in the assemblies, what I know is that they have used like a very consensus based thing. Like they don't necessarily vote, but they reach an agreement. And that has been really great. And I don't know why. Like I don't even think they call themselves anarchists, but like they just see it makes sense for them to like keep as many people inside as you can, because if you make it antagonistic, people will start leaving. So you need to have something that keeps as big the biggest number of people happy. And my more personal experience really has been in something different, which is working on basic income. So I'm a basic income advocate, and we started the basic income network last year in March when the pandemic started. And we are now a network or something like 40 people, but most of the work and most of the activities are organized by a group of like 8. And we have organized like online talks, we have written things. We are now trying to put basic income in the constitution, and we have been talking to candidates for that. So that has been like my more personal, like specific involvement.
So, but this last activities, it looks like you um, you more like an intellectual lobbyist group who is tasked to. It's a small team of people who have a common vision, and you try to promote it as wide as you can, and also effectively try to lobby politician when you talk about the Putin basic income and constitution. And in this case, you
Yes,
literally
but not.
like rebellion, yeah, like but just smaller.
I mean, yes, but just because that's like where we know, just because we know we can talk to people there and they will listen. But for instance, we'll also invited to one of these assemblies, one of these local assemblies in Santiago, to talk about this. And I also know in some local spaces, like grassroots spaces, they are also been talking and thinking about this. So we can also go there and maybe have like an event where we discuss this and we can answer questions and see what they feel about it. I went to a couple of these also during the year. So but this is completely new, so as much as I would love it to be a wider discussion, it's taking time, but we're trying. I mean, we're doing what we can.
And so if you compare your analysis of what had happened in Chile, when basically the wider understanding that the regime should be changed right away instead of like going through bureaucratic process of changing constitution. So this is one way of creating a political order and creating structures. And what you're doing with basic income is a different way. Yeah, am I
Yes.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, basic income for me made sense before October 2019, but also the whole idea of rewriting the constitution, it's an excellent opportunity to introduce something like a right to care or a right to basic income. So it was a kind of a coming together and seeing, because I mean, I personally think that a lot of of the demands from October could like basic income would made a lot of sense for that feeling of like indignation of being worthless unless you are productive, which is what happens here. So yeah, that was like a coming together of two things that were kind of in separate ways.
So, but if again, if I understand correctly what you were describing, ideally you want for Chile something like Bookchin, yeah, like a like democratic.
Well, yeah,
Like,
I mean, yes, of course. I mean, this is okay. So this is also like the thing, right? Like, I don't really think we should keep the state at all. Like, right? We should transcend this and to move something out like a real democratic confederalism of autonomous zones working together. And this is also why I'm really interested in basic income outside the nation state. And I have been working on this for a couple of years, like how we can transform money. So communities themselves are the one creating money and delivering basic income. And I would love to do a pilot or an experiment of something like that here in Chile. And that's like my line of work in basic income. Like I think it's a way of transcending the state. But then also, when you are, I saw myself in the middle of this, and I like my ideal situation would be that this constituent assembly can create a state as weak as possible or a state that can like as democratic confederalism as possible, that will give back as much power as possible to people, and then take it from there and just start building power outside those structures. Like I also didn't feel I could just like not participate in this at all just because it has to do with institutional stuff, because I mean, you have to work with what you have. But yeah, I mean, I would love to see that happening. But I have more faith really in creating spaces outside, like what is happening now in indigenous land, which is here, and also Walmapu with the Mapuche people. I don't know if you know, like they have been building autonomy for centuries. I mean, they have been trying to keep their autonomy since the state took it away from them. And I think that's the road. They are the ones that are building really like a different reality. Like that's the deeper revolution that is more of in the underground. But as we know from revolutions like Rojava, like who you have in power when these more autonomous efforts start is really, really important. And I would love that we had a power that will not bomb anywhere when they start claiming autonomy. So that for me, I mean, it makes a difference, really, what kind of power you have. And the less fascist it is, the best. So that's like a bit of my thinking, like you need to like start weakening the state. So these other realities can grow and be not smashed when they claim their autonomy.
do I understand you correctly that in the local communities, when the people kind of know each other and clearly have a common interest because they live together and they're doing something together, like fishing, or basically they have a common project, they're more inclined to have consensus. And if you have like power structures that just exist here to to be the power structures, then there is no possibility for consensus with everybody. It's not only technical, not possible, but the way how the whole architecture organize preventing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, and this is very, very important, people get tired. So in the first 6 months, just before the pandemic hit, there was like a huge surge of this coordination of assemblies and people coming together and creating more work for themselves. So you send people to a coordination of different assemblies, and they create new roles and new things you need to do, and you have to bring a document back and then forth with the comments, and you create more work for yourself. And after a few months, with a pandemic in the middle, when maybe you lost your job and you have to survive like we all have, you're just tired. So that also burned out a lot of people, and I think that's been such a bad timing. I mean, it's very frustrating to see, because like you watch these people like trying to juggle with the pandemic at the same time that organizing their communities. Or I don't know, here in Chile there were like 2 or 3 months in which it was all about defending workers from not being fired in the context of the pandemic, and all the networks of communication were filled with that. So the broader effort of coordination was like suspended. Now it's been recovered, and I'm glad to see that it actually has been recovered. But it was hard, and people really got tired.
If anybody else have questions.
I think you mentioned wind farms at one point. And I live at the top of Scotland, where we have a lot of wind and convert it into electricity and hydrogen. But you also mentioned people campaigning, I think, for and against them. Had you any thoughts on how a sane society might have a decision-making process around that sort of area? Because it is a question of where you put the farm and who owns it and who benefits from it and many other things.
Mm. That's great that you're in Scotland. Thank you for asking that question, because it's like a lot of my literature talks about that actually. And I think, and it's also very geographically similar, I think, like islands, and the weather is similar. I think it's two things. One, and this is like has been the focus of my research, is the longer historical relations. So the state, the Chilean state, has always had an extractive and colonial relation with this archipelago. So since the state was created, this territory has been sacked. First with timber, then with salmon farming that killed the sea, and now fishermen cannot really fish, and with the growing of trees for wood, foreign species, and then now also like this how you call it, like the grass that keeps the water. I think you also have that in Scotland, right? Yeah. Now there is like an indiscriminate grabbing and selling of that. So we have like water scarcity. So on top of all of that, you have the government coming and like intervening huge areas of forest, which is very precious for water here, and building these massive wind farms, creating huge amounts of energy. I think last time I saw it is like our current generation is something like 4 times what we consume here, and all of that is going to the continent for the central connected network, and a third of that electricity is consumed by mining companies. We don't need that mining. That mining should go down or should disappear. There's no such thing as sustainable mining. Mining is incompatible with life. We have seen that, like, you know, people are dying, ecosystems are dying. So like they come here and they sell that we need to produce more electricity because if we don't, then the country, you know, like the lady on the corner won't have light on their house. But it's not about that. They're not making light. They're not making electricity for the people. All the electricity goes out, and you have here people in rural areas who don't have light. So there's this discourse that we must increase our energy consumption. It is not true. So like if we actually made energy for the people who need it for their daily uses or for whatever thing they want to do, and not for private businesses, then the ecological pressure on land would, I think, would be massively reduced. And I think for a long time we have an extremely privatized system to generate electricity. So for a long time we have actually had more offer of energy than we have consumption. So the system is just completely irrational. Just because it's good business to put a wind farm because the state guarantees they're going to buy it for you, it doesn't mean it's answering to the needs. So I think here the whole idea of energy democracy that maybe you know is crucial. That, you know, like build the energy for the people who need it, and give them freedom to decide how to do it. And I'm thinking about, you know, small scale solar, small scale wind farm, maybe not made of plastic because it doesn't last for long, maybe made of wood that is much more sustainable. And you don't have to create massive grids that cut everything in their path, but you can make, like, you know, things that are have much less intervention. And there are endless really alternatives to like this madness of just continue availability of energy.
Here we're in one sense lucky because we generate more electricity than we use, and the cable to the mainland of Scotland has limited capacity.
Yes.
So we tried to convert the surplus into hydrogen.
Yes, well, that's interesting because here it's happening the same. So now they want to make another cable so they can take more energy. And the thing with hydrogen is interesting because I think so. Who would use the hydrogen you are manufacturing? Would it be for you?
We are basically, yes, we are trying to
Okay.
convert ferries and ships and even a small plane. There's a lot of experimental work going on up here to run things on hydrogen rather than fossil fuels. So
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. The
and
thing with hydrogen is interesting. Yeah. So, sorry. Please finish, and then I can.
no, that was so. Now, again, also up here, we have the highest rate of fuel poverty in the United
Mm,
Kingdom, which means that many people can't afford to heat their houses properly.
mm,
So there is the question of how can we basically can we find a way to sell off surplus electricity cheaply and locally. So there's that sort
mm,
of area as well. But so far it's small scale, and what can we do with this usefully?
mm. Yeah, here is the same paradox. Like you have like the little house right below the wind farm doesn't get electricity and they need to use a diesel generator because capitalism is irrational. But the thing with hydrogen is that I think it's a very interesting technology, but I'm afraid it's being used, or they're planning to use it, the whole green hydrogen, which is still very experimental, in a very imperialistic way. So what I know, for instance, from Chile is that they want to install massive wind farms in Patagonia in the south to ship it to Germany. So, they want to use all that land, which is a stolen indigenous land, to put these massive wind farms that also have ecological impacts. So we can make enough fossil fuels so you can have green transport in Europe. And what is the point? I mean, what are we willing to sacrifice to sustain the same civilization we built based on fossil fuels? It's very tricky, and no one is really considering the impacts because they sell it as being renewable, but like it adds up. It really does. And water availability, particularly, which is very critical and becoming more critical every day, um, is one of the main affected dimensions of ecosystems. So all of that is very emergent here. It hasn't been built because the technology, as far as I know, is still not profitable enough. It's still much cheaper to build hydrogen from fossil fuels overall. I'm glad to hear it in Scotland it's not, but here it's still there are plans. These are all plans. They haven't happened.
It's interesting when you said about the initial uprising when there was chaos on the streets, but then actually people needed to understand why the country is on fire. So how there was this mobilization to train everyone in essentially to kind of explain what's happening, because
Yeah.
and how did that happen? Because it's hard, right? When there is this moment of social effervescence where everyone's, how do you actually make people come together to listen? Because it's also about listening from those who actually have done the work before.
Yeah.
How did it happen?
So I think there were two legs of this table, so to say. One was not really led by intellectuals or by written text, but by art. And art played and has been playing a very, very strong role. So you would see these massive murals, for instance, in which you would have figures from the past, like the singer Victor Jara, like our Nobel Prize Gabriela Mistral, like Gladys Marin, who was a famous communist leader, and even this dog, I don't know if you have seen him, this like there's a black dog with a red scarf that was our companion on the streets in 2011. So all these figures from history came back in the form of art. So you would see these amazing graffitis of like Gabriela Mistral dressed like in a punk style, carrying like a feminist flag, and and I don't know, like text about explaining why Walmapu, the land of the Mapuche, wasn't free because the state was an oppressive force, and you see all these pictures of the police being like monsters, beating people, and things explaining inequality, like how inequality was in the heart of our country. I mean, maybe I could show you some of this graffiti because they were really like capsule essays of like, wait, let me see if I have them at hand. Um, there's one that says like that Chile was an injury that would leave a scar, and like, like the shape of the country. So it was like all this explanation. Or for instance, I remember being wait, I'm gonna finish this and then I'm gonna show you the pictures. In one of the squares where I was, I mean, sometimes people would just carry like big banners in which they explain things like, my mom was a teacher and the state didn't pay her salary for 20 years, and this is like a historical debt owed to teachers, and now is the moment to pay that debt. So she would walk with this, and people would like go to her and say, I'm so sorry what happened to you, this is unfair, my mom was also a teacher, blah blah blah. Or like you would just hug people. I hugged a lot of people. I remember seeing like this old man who had like said something like, gracias juventud por tu valentía, like thanks to the youth for their bravery. The military should never again use their weapons against their people. And he would just walk around with that. Or people that were very ill would put in a sign like, I have cancer, I'm dying, but I'm not afforded, like I have been in a waiting list for 3 years. And people would just go there and just like cry or hug him or like tell him this was infuriating. So that was the first conversation, like just bringing everything together. Or people doing threads on Twitter explaining like, oh, my mom was very scared, I went on the streets because of the cops, but I told her I'm doing this for her because she doesn't have a pension, and if she gets ill we can't afford her medications. And like that, those snapshots, like very ethnographic stories, very short if you want, like not very dense theoretically, they were the ones that made sense. Because we were like, oh my god, this is right, like I have been working my whole life, but now my pension is going to be zero. Or people mistreat me, and people would say like, oh, this is the same story I have heard over and over again. So that was, I think, the most important thing, and is still the most important thing. And then we had like these university professors in TV shows saying, well, the constitution of Pinochet, blah blah blah, it's very restricted because it doesn't allow to change the laws, it has a very high quorum, so we need to change that. And okay, yeah, that is also true, it's important to understand that the quorum system, whatever, but like that only came after we actually had this very emotional and very artistic, people dancing on the streets, people making artistic interventions. You saw the Las Tesis chant that is also like a short feminist manifesto on police violence. And like this was every day. Every day the streets were like people doing like short theater performances, and people were reading poetry and singing songs. And it was like amazing. I'm gonna now try to look for some pictures if I can show you. So I'm not gonna talk because I can't do two things at once.
Just one thing before I go, I had a question. I didn't know they had to cut down trees for the wind farms.
To cut down what? Sorry?
Forest for the wind farms.
Yes, they have cut down like vegetation. Yes, that has
That's
been.
so crazy because yeah, it's the whole fallacy of the renewable energy, right? And
Yeah.
it's the same in Amazon with hydroelectric, I think. And
Yeah, hydroelectricity, the dams. Yeah.
But yeah, and we think like Chile is full of like you have enormous desert. One would think you don't have to cut down any trees to get wind, right?
Well, but also in the desert, there are living things, and living things that get affected when you extract lithium or when you put solar panels. Like everything has an impact. Sadly, it's not. There is no empty place. That's something I have learned during my fieldwork. And whatever you are planning to build, like massive infrastructure, you are affecting people, and you're doing it in someone else's land. And surprise, surprise, it's usually indigenous land or stolen land. So like you're just reproducing the violence on imposing them that they must do it for the growth of the economy, or like
Yeah, when
Can
it's
I?
usually just powering like the same three industries and somewhere else.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. That was very nice talk. I hope it all goes well in Chile.
Thanks. If you can you enable me to share the screen so I can show you
Yes,
the
yes,
pictures,
yes.
because I have my. Okay, I think now I can. Okay. So okay, can you see Victor Jara?
Wow.
So do you know him? He was killed during the dictatorship, and one of his songs against the Vietnam War became like the anthem of the demonstration. So you would see things related to him everywhere, and I love it. It's like very kitsch. This is like also one. He died a few years ago, but he's like a very beloved TV presenter, and that's the dog I was telling you. That's the Negro Matapacos. That's his name.
So is it
So
okay if
this,
I
for
take
instance,
some? Is it okay with you if I take some screenshots?
yeah, sure.
This and us. Okay.
I mean, I'm guessing all this is like just they put it on the wall so we could take pictures of it. So this is, for instance, an oasis of horror, criminal state. So talking about revolution can seem absurd, but the alternatives that are left are even more absurd because they imply to accept the established order one way or another. So this is like literally like a small essay. It's great. And that's the president down there. What else? So the people of the world, we are not a commodity. Down with the dictatorship of capital. That's nice. I had forgotten about that. Don't forgive them because they know what they do. So that's basically, if you can see, like he has one eye with blood because they did this thing of shooting at people's eyes. I mean, they still doing it, but there was a period in which, hundreds of people just lost their eyes because of the police. Yeah, so like the red eye became a symbol of the protest, and covering your eye when you saw the police also became like a symbol of protest. So I curse all the bullets, how much is our pain? And that is also from a song from Violeta Parra, who is like a very important singer. So it's always going back to art, which I think it's amazing. It's always referring to some artist or singer. Yeah, that's just the street. That's probably in November. Yeah, that's how it looked from. Yeah, so like race, police, and they will take your eyes. Again, the reference to the eyes. That's when the fires were starting, the barricades. When we are victims, the cameras don't work because the police had been using recordings to incriminate Mapuche leaders in their struggle. And whenever they killed someone, there were never recordings of that. So this was referring to that, obviously. So the people in the ground and you laughing, it's like laughing out loud. The damage caused will never be forgotten. And this is the president, this is his wife and the police with people in the ground. So for the last thing they see, for the last thing our eyes see is a dignified Chile of people closing their eyes so they can see a dignified Chile. There is no true happiness that is not revolutionary. This is nice. I have forgotten about this one. Yes, and this was one of the cabildos, for instance. This was about water, I think. So it was really full. It was like they were expecting 30 people and we were like 100. So that was like, always overflowing the spaces. So we're talking about water and water management. And this was already a demand for the constitution to be plurinational. So this is from the people of the North, the Andean people of the Andes. So they were saying Constituent Assembly should be plurinational because we don't acknowledge them. And this was, so indigenous people, this is from the anniversary of the death of Camilo Catrillanca, who was a leader that got killed by the police 2 years ago, actually. That's him. So Camilo Catrillanca, this fight is for you. That's really beautiful. And yeah, we lit some candles for him. It ended up quite bad that day. It was very violent. At that time, the police wasn't outside, but then later they arrived and they interrupted all the rituals, and it was very, yeah, that's the justice, tribunals of justice, I don't know how to say it. And we were doing like a ceremony to honor him. Yeah, well, you can't see that much. Yeah, that's how the bullets left the trees. I took a picture because just to show how much harm they did. So that's one of the trees that got shot at. Poor tree. And maybe I can show you. Can you see this one?
Yes.
Or maybe, okay. I love this one. This is great. It's a guy with like a heart. So this was like the streets were just this, and it would change every day. So you know, it was like a mix of graffiti. Yeah, well, maybe I should stop. I have like I don't know, 200 pictures. I could share them forever. I can share them with you if you want to see them, because they're very interesting. I would love someday to actually write down something about it, but it's very informative. Well, maybe if you know any Spanish, it would help, but they are still very telling, even if you don't understand the words.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you want them, I can also share them with you, like whatever material I have.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Gabi. Very nice to see you.
I hope it was helpful to what you're building.
Very much.
Yeah, very great talking to comrades always. So